Okay, the reading today, the gospel lesson, which is supposed to be the good news. This is part of chapter 5 of Matthew. Chapter 5 of Matthew, chapter 6 of Matthew, chapter 7 of Matthew is all the Sermon on the Mount. And just reading through that, again, we'd be here till after lunch, let alone what it means. So, the lectionary committee that picks these texts for a given Sunday, they had to pick a chunk. And they did, and that was the reading you heard today. Now, the tricky part here is that last week, Jesus started the Sermon on the Mount, and he's a good preacher. So he started by engaging his listeners. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the peacemakers. And that's nice. That's a good thing to do. And then Jesus becomes a Lutheran pastor. Okay, 15 centuries, okay, but he became a Lutheran pastor. And when I was in seminary, we learned every year we were required to take a preaching class, and we learned to preach like Lutherans. And Lutherans preach by presenting the law of God and the gospel of God. The law that confronts sin and the gospel that proclaims forgiveness. And this chunk here is the law of God. Thanks a lot. Because it's not popular. Now, Jesus does this. He says, you have heard it said, you shall not murder. You have heard it said, you shall not swear. You shall not, be lustful. You shall not steal. You have heard it said. Yeah, they had heard it said too. Those are the 10 Commandments. Those are 1,500 years old. Now, they're about 3,500 years old. And the folks sitting on the mount, as well as people ever since, have heard the words of the 10 Commandments, and they get out the checklist. 10 little boxes, and they say to themselves, well, yeah, you shall not kill. Nope, didn't kill anyone this week. You shall not steal. No, left the bank alone. Okay, Go through the whole list. 8 out of 10, pretty good. 1 that's sort of an iffy one, maybe partial credit. 9 out of 10, I'm good with God, God's good with me. Good till next week. Yeah. They've been doing that for a long time. But Jesus says, you shall not murder. But I say to you, you shall not be angry. You shall not be upset. You shall not swear an oath. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. If you covet something or someone, even you don't act on it, you're still as guilty of it. And that made his hearers, and probably you, a little uncomfortable, or annoyed, or upset. Jesus is doing what the law should do, to prick through self-confidence, self-righteousness, and make us see who and what we are. I had this explained to me in my first parish by Lola. Lola was in her mid-40s. She was married to Harold. They had 2 kids in the confirmation classes. But Lola, before she got married, she was born and raised in the Assembly of God. And that denomination has a rather different approach to preaching and other things like that. And I had preached on this, a sermon like this, and she comes out at the door, and instead of saying, nice sermon, Pastor, which everyone says, she said, well, you did a good job about the line between preaching and meddling. And I thought to myself, okay, three classes at seminary, law, gospel, speech, delivery. No, we never touched on meddling. Okay. So what's the line there, Lola? And she said, preaching is when the preacher confronts and condemns sin. Okay. Good preaching is when the preacher names specific sins and condemns those. And she says, this is the high point, because I can sit there and say, thou shalt not gossip. I know who he's talking about, don't you, Rita? Yeah. You shall not be angry, yeah, Henry? You listening here, Henry? You know, I can do all that, see? But when the preacher starts talking about me and my sins that I struggle with, then he's passed over the line from preaching to meddling. Yeah. And that's what Jesus is doing. That's what the law is supposed to do. This business of if you start down this path, it gets worse and worse. It's one of the harder things about being parents or even grandparents. You've got these little people here, and they can be selfish, and they can think me, and I, and I want this. You can't have it. And you have to keep on the alert for that, because otherwise they grow up in their high school to be bullies, and when they grow up in adulthood, they might turn into politicians, and so you've got to get on this right away. We see it just in our bodies. These things, they accumulate. That one extra helping, raiding the refrigerator for some ice cream again. And before you know it, you're standing in front of your closet, nothing fits. And Nutrisystem, Jenny Craig, and Golo all want to be your best friend. But it also goes the other way. It's what Paul was talking about in that letter to the Corinthians. I planted the seed. Apollos watered. I fed you milk because you were not ready for solid food. I planted, Apollos watered, and God gave the growth. Because these little things accumulate that way too. You know, there you are. Put on the Christmas 10, or maybe you're getting ready for next week's Fact Sunday. Some of us have been getting ready for months for that, you know. And you said, daggone it, I'm going to put on the sweats, I'm going to put on the glove and the coat, and I'm going to put on the walking shoes, and I am going to go to the end of the block and back. And I'm going to do it tomorrow again. And I'm going to do it twice tomorrow after that. And then I'm going to go around the block. And I'm going to do this twice a day. And I'm going to, and by golly, look at that. Do that long enough, and things fit better, and you don't treat the bathroom scale like a landmine. Okay. So it builds up. It's the little things that accumulate. It's like if you're a member of a congregation that happens to be in the Midwest, that once a year asks everyone to come and listen to the leaders of the church of what we're going to do next year and the budget to pay for it. And you could maybe vote on that. And then how are we going to do that? And if you introduce a little portrait of Abraham Lincoln to the offering plate, over and above what you've been doing, by golly, at the end of the year, that's added up to $250 more. And you're better for it. And if you play your cards right, the church treasurer will send you a nice thank you note. It builds up. We tell our children to behave. And once they start to behave, they get to be nice. They get to be kind. They get to be generous. If they keep doing that, we start noticing and calling them well-mannered. It builds up to the point where you're a person of character And that's meant as a compliment. Because it's not, you're thinking about it anymore. It's second nature. It's automatic. And it's hard to say how far the growth can go. We have a rather nerve-wracking example of the Amish. You know, folks, the plain folk, black wagons, one horse, beards on the guys, but no mustaches. These are considered suspicious, by the way, by them. Drindle skirts, and a very plain way of living. They want to keep their dealings with the rest of the world at a minimum. It's them, and everyone else who's not them is the English. Doesn't matter about no, you're English. Even if you're Ole Sven Borgensen, you're English, according to the Amish. Yeah. But once in a while, there they are, they're in the fabric store or in the feed store, and something happens. Someone comes in. They wave a gun. They root through the cash register. There is a robbery. And they are the witness to it. And they catch the robber, and they put him on trial, and now the DA calls Rachel Applebaum as the next witness. And you've seen enough crime shows, you know how this works. Before Rachel gets to sit down, the bailiff comes over with a Bible, says, put your right hand here, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing truth, so help you God? I do. State your name and then sit down. You've seen that, right? But in Pennsylvania and counties from Ohio out onto the Dakotas, there are laws that state that the Amish, if they are in good standing with their community, are exempt from being sworn in. Jesus commanded, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And the Amish have said, you mean I have to stand here and this testimony I give is truer and more honest and more faithful than the rest of my life? That's an insult to my religion. And the courts have agreed. That makes me nervous, because I got to get sworn in for something like that. But that's the kind of character that has built up in them. We see it again in the bodily form when we have little people who admire sports figures. They see someone go tumbling across the mat or swinging back and forth on the uneven parallel bars and doing stuff you can't believe. And if you're 4 years old, you want to start doing that too. And you're clumsy at it, and you're bad at it, and you get better at it, and you hope to be like that. It's the same way on the spiritual level. It builds up a little bit at a time, and eventually it's just part of being you. And suddenly, once in a while, the world looks over and says, holy smoke. Not for an athletic feat, but for a moral feat. Like Roddy Edmonds. You've never heard of Roddy Edmonds, I'm sure. Roddy Edmonds was a GI during World War II. Master Sergeant. U.S. got into that war because, and there'd been all these nasty stories coming out of Germany and what the Nazis were up to when that going bad process had gotten badder and worse and nasty. And it was so bad it was hard to believe it. But everyone was pretty clear, if you're Jewish and you fall into the hands of the Nazis, it's not good. Well, Roddy Edmonds got to be a sergeant, master sergeant. I've never seen a picture of him, but I got this image. Crew cut, leather face, glint in the eye that can make a third-day recruit burst into tears, little snarl on the lip. He and many others in the closing days of 1944 were captured as POWs by a German attack. It was eventually beaten off. It's called the Battle of the Bulge. But they had some success, and they took some prisoners, including Master Sergeant Roddy Edmonds. And early in 1945, a bunch of these prisoners were delivered by train to Ziegenhain, Germany. And they were marched from the train station over to, there's a fence, there's barbed wire, there are guard towers. POW camp. There are barracks, there's a mess hall. And they're all marched in there. And they're all made to stand in a square formation. And then the commandant comes out with a guy next to him to do the translating from German into English. What the rules are going to be, how everything's going to be done. And then he said, but first, said to these 1,000 American GI prisoners of war, but first, all the Jewish soldiers are going to fall out over here. Oh boy. And everyone was swallowing hard on that. And then comes a shout from the ranks. Master Sergeant Robbie Edmonds, we are all Jews here. Yeah. And so they served out their time. The war ended 4 months later. The camps were liberated. And some of the officers counted noses. They figured out that Robbie Edmonds had saved over 50 men by his shout. And he said, everyone said, how could you do it? That was so brave. That was so heroic. And he said what most heroes say, I just did what anyone else would do. Well, yeah, if you've built up to that, it's just the next thing. It's just an example for all of us. It's something we can all strive for. It's something we can all get to. And that is the good news of living the Christian life. Amen.